Kamala Harris is allowed to be racially ambiguous, and her racial ambiguity directly benefits her. But generally speaking, it kind of hurts everybody else. What's going on? My name is Joe, and I practice talking on the internet. And I wanted to talk a little bit about I guess you could say, side conversation that came about with Kamala Harris and her lack of identifying as a Black woman. To catch you up a little bit, this goes all the way back to 2016. The same critique about somehow Kamala Harris became a Black woman, that goes all the way back to the 2016 campaign.
I wrote the article about you, and I just outlined everything that every Black man in the barbershop, Black woman would talk about in the conversations, because I always go back to it, because basically everything that everybody was saying about you, whether she's Black enough, does she like Black men, she's putting Black people in jail, the common things that was actually said. But at the same time, I write that, and I didn't have a conversation with you. When we had the conversation and we talked about it, we talked about the different things. It was almost, and after the conversation, I felt like I was actually certifying you, because we were talking about fried chicken and talking about all these different things. And then we talked about the gun and the FICO score and these different, so it was okay. That's right. It's like, I like this lady. You know what I'm saying? She's about everything that we're about.
There's a few sort of like small examples of that existing. And then generally throughout her career, she doesn't really dig into that identity. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't necessarily care. I just think it's a choice that I don't think folks quite understand. Donald Trump, during the most recent presidential debate, or not even during the recent presidential debate, you want to go back to that journalist conference that he went to, he alluded to the idea that somehow all of a sudden Kamala Harris decided to be Black.
Well, I can say no, I think it's maybe a little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was Black until a number of years ago, when she happened to turn Black, and now she wants to be known as Black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she Black?
She has always identified as a Black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically
either
Black
one.
college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a Black person.
And then she kind of goes back and forth with that. JD Vance alluded to some of that as well. Maybe I can find that quote if I do a little bit of editing with this video.
So I am the father of biracial children. Actually, my wife is here today. My kids are back home with my aunt today. And look, I was not bothered at all by what President Trump said, and I didn't take it as an attack on Kamala Harris's biracial background at all. What I took it as was an attack on Kamala Harris being a chameleon. She pretends to be one thing when she's in front of one audience. She pretends to be something else when she's in front of another audience. And I think he was observing the basic foundational reality that Kamala Harris pretends to be something different depending on which audience she's speaking to.
But I say all that to say that it's a tactic that she uses to appeal to this sort of large tent. I don't want to call it large tent neutrality, because that sounds kind of contradictory, but basically she, by not directly pinning herself in various particular boxes, it allows her to navigate a little bit more freely within others. Basically, because of her mixed race, she's allowed to and has the privilege to navigate within all these other areas. If she needs to, she can lean into her Indian American heritage. If she needs to, she can lean into her Black heritage. If she needs to, she can lean into her experience as a prosecutor. And all of those things for her are just political strategies. She's trying not to, I would argue, directly appeal to her Blackness as a means of articulating a Black political agenda. I don't believe she has that. And something that I think Donald Trump is trying to do is make the argument that by her not digging into her Blackness, that's coming in a way that's inauthentic, but also a way that she's hiding nefarious need, like I won't say, like I don't know how to word this thought exactly, but a more like shadow type of rhetoric where she's hiding her blackness because she's actually a communist. She's hiding her blackness because she's actually a Marxist. She's hiding her blackness because she's actually a progressive. Republicans do this a lot, where they conflate being black as being progressive, being black as being communist, socialist, Marxist, and it doesn't work. And it's funny because they know that, but then at the same time, for whatever reason in America, it's a really effective strategy. Um, it's a really effective strategy. I know from when the rubber hits the road, when you actually engage and navigate with different Black Americans, it just doesn't work. But for whatever reason, when you go to the mainstream of it all, the mainstream conversations about Black identity and Black politics broadly, that's just sticks really well. Even though I think it's just rice paper reinforced by concrete. Um, and then we call the rice paper the floor. It's really bizarre. I was having some different conversations in different circles about Matt Walsh's video, or movie rather. I keep calling it a video because it might as well just be a YouTube video, extended YouTube video. But anyway, he released a movie that's neither here nor there. And it's funny because there were people who argued, like, of course me in this example would make this argument about Matt Walsh because look at his hairdo. Look at him. And I'm like, what does that mean? I know what they're trying to say. I just wish they would just say it outright. But it's just kind of interesting. But it goes into that sort of problem here, where Kamala Harris, because of the consequences that can happen by labeling herself as a Black woman overtly in the political public, that would attest to some type of idea that because she's directly identifying herself as Black, that means that there's sort of political agendas that are baked underneath that Blackness. And it's totally understandable and obvious that there are Black people that don't have Black political agendas at all. Very clear examples of this are Raphael Warnock, Tim Scott, Cory Booker, Jasmine Crockett. Like, these are Black people who are in position to power that don't have very clear Black political agendas. They have agendas that are informed by a bunch of other things. And they still, like, I'll use Jasmine Crockett as an example, like, she still proudly identifies as a Black woman, but she doesn't have the ability to be racially ambiguous about her identity in the way that Kamala Harris is. That's a privilege that Kamala Harris has because of her mixed raceness. And that's something that I don't think people quite, I won't say they don't quite get or understand. I think some people do. They just don't really care to engage with that part of the conversation, honestly. Jasmine Crockett and Raphael Warnock don't have the ability to discard their Blackness in the public sphere. Like, they don't have because they are very clearly Black people. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is not clearly a Black woman. So she's going to always have to have some type of clarification if that's challenged. But what's interesting for me, at least, in this most recent emergence of this challenging, the people who are running defense for her are, one, in some cases, not Black people. So that's a totally other thing. But then also there's Black people who are pointing to, I think it was one podcaster that's like in the B plus sphere of internet conversations, pointed to all of her accolades, like being a member of the D9. It was if I remember while I'm editing this, I'll put that clip there, but that was embarrassing.
Like the things I'm seeing them do to her now, like she's not really black. She she grew up in Oakland. Well, first she worked at McDonald's. She grew up in Oakland. She went to an HBCU. She plays AKA, and she once had a boyfriend named Willie. If that ain't black, I don't know what is.
Willie Brown.
And she got a first name white men can't pronounce. So I don't. So I don't understand. So my thing.
Now, of course, Trump is saying that Kamala isn't black. I guarantee you this, Kamala's been black a lot longer than Trump's been a Republican. And if he keeps sliding in the polls the way he is, the only way he can keep Kamala out of the White House is if he buys it and refuses to rent it to her.
But basically he was alluding to like, she is black because of all of these things, and because of all of these things, then it must be so. And that's not how that works at all. Like, race is how other people perceive you. And granted, there is an affirmation aspect to that, absolutely. But mixed race people have the privilege of ambiguity. So because you are ambiguous, you can, in a political aspect, lean into that ambiguity to allow you to make particular arguments based on other aspects of who you are, or just not engage with the black part at all. Or you engage with the black part when it's politically convenient for you. Examples of this are Tim Scott's. From the celebrity aspect, there's a bunch of folks within that. The most common one that people bring up is Amber Rose, where in their cases, especially Amber Rose, because she is very racially ambiguous, she can lean into her ambiguity to articulate and talk about a totally different politic that has nothing to do with black people. And that's, and again, like, being racially ambiguous in a political landscape gives you a lot of benefits, because when you're not easily clockable in a particular identity, then you're able to sort of like bob and weave in different ways. Other examples of this and aren't black people, a very common one of that is Nikki Haley. Because when you look at Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy, they're both Asian Americans, but for the longest time, I'm speaking anecdotally here, my mother thought Nikki was short for Nicole, and her name was Nicole Haley, which is wild. But I don't think that my conservative mother is an exception or something that's super like out of the norm. Like, if you look at Nikki Haley, she just looks like a white woman, and we can be honest with that. Now, when she articulates her heritage, then all of the well actuallys come into play. But there's a lot of people politically who can't do that. They don't get to be able to hide that Nikki is a Punjabi name and are just outwardly, because of the different indexicals that they have in their presentation, only points to that. There's a lot of people who can only be black, for an example. Stacey Abrams can only be black. Jasmine Crockett can only be black. Raphael Warnock can only be black. But Cory Booker? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a difference. I hope that's following here, where those are all black people, but because, like, if you point in a particular way, usually towards non-black or essentially white, if you want to really make like the more, like, I won't say the more extreme argument, but like a more pointed argument, then yes, like Cory Booker, because of his racial ambiguity and being mixed race, can present himself in a particular manner that's a little bit different than the way that Jasmine Crockett is able to. And you're able to, because of that ambiguity, navigate in different circles. Like, the thing that was so interesting to me during the debates and then the conversation is that Kamala Harris is choosing not to engage with that. She's choosing not to engage in the questioning of her blackness, where I think it's very easy for her to do things rhetorically, like say, why is a white person trying to determine who is and who isn't a black person? Now, Donald Trump from being very charitable, basically clarify that he doesn't really care what she is. But even though I don't care what she is, she's presenting herself in a very ambiguous way. That's kind of the argument that he's trying to say. Again, JD Vance, I think, called her directly a chameleon, which is crazy. Again, if I put the clip earlier in there in this thing, if I remember, then that's what he said. And if he didn't, then cool, I'm corrected within my own video. But at the end of the day, I don't have any indication to believe that Kamala Harris has any type of black political agenda. So I think conservatives can kind of rest easy in that she doesn't really care about black people in a substantive manner. And I think people, and you can just sleep easy on that part. So her identification as a black woman rhetorically would just be to essentially combat or navigate around racist narratives. And if the only purpose of her clarifying that she's a black woman is to fight back against racist narratives, then I guess I understand why she doesn't answer the question in the first place. Because for a while, some people were getting cooked about why she wasn't answering, and I was getting kind of cooked as well. But I think that the longer I was able to sit on it, the more it's like, okay, she has the privilege of being racial ambiguous, that racial ambiguity leads to privileges. And one of those privileges is that in the face of being questioned for your blackness, you don't have to engage with it. And you can engage with other things, like questioning Donald Trump's racial record. Talking, when I say racial record, his record when talking and navigating about race, which is what Kamala did during the debate itself. By and large, I don't necessarily think that this is a winning strategy. I think it's totally fine to set black political agendas. I think it's totally fine to set black political agendas, even if you are a racially ambiguous person. But again, like, there's going to be some type of side choosing, you're being divisive type of stuff that comes with that. And I think that if you are a black person, especially if you're a black person that doesn't have the privilege to move around in spaces where you could be perceived as non-black, then I think especially if you do have the desire to set black political agendas and articulate those, then you ought to. I don't think you should run away from that. But again, not all black people have nor want to set black political agendas, so it's kind of just whatever to me. With that being said, obviously I'm back to doing content again, as you're seeing another video back to back to another. So feel free. I try my best to be very engaged within the communities I try to cultivate. So if there's something that I wasn't clear about that, or if you want to have a more extended conversation, whether it be about this or anything else, feel free to send a message to me on Twitter, or just drop. I don't really have messages in here on YouTube, but feel free to engage within, whether it be community tabs. If I post something, like I try to make myself as accessible as I can be. So feel free to comment or do whatever you want to do. Preferably, like, you know the drill. Like the video, comment. If you like what I'm talking about, subscribe, all that stuff. But all right, that's all I got for now. But yeah, I'll see y'all soon. Okay.